We tend to assume psychology helps, neuroscience explains, and psychotherapy heals. Sometimes they do, but used too narrowly, they can also trap us inside a convincing story about ourselves that isn't actually true. In this video, I'll explain why a purely psychological view of mind can leave you more informed, yet less free, and why we need a wider perspective if real change is going to happen. To understand why this trap is so easy to fall into, we need to make one distinction, a distinction that goes unnoticed by most people most of the time. And by most, I mean 99% of us, nearly all the time. The difference between your objective self and your subjective self. These aren't philosophical abstractions. Understanding this difference is the difference between living from the inside out or spending your life reacting from the outside in. Your objective self is everything you are normally aware of. Your body and senses, the physical sensations, appetite, temperature, mood, the slow accumulation of age. Your identity, the roles you perform, mother, director, son, carer, and your beliefs about yourself, whether you see yourself as an imposter or an expert, healthy or not, wealthy or struggling, loved or overlooked. None of it matters whether it is objectively true. What matters here is that it is your experience of it. Your objective self, then, is the entire summation of your human experience, physical, social, and psychological. Everything within your sphere of perception is included. Nothing is left out. And notice this, there is no real separation between your objective self and the world around you, because everything that appears to be out there is always perceived within you. So if the objective self contains everything, what's left? If we have covered every thought, every feeling, every sensation, belief and role, what could possibly remain? This is where it gets interesting, and yes, also where it gets abstract. Bear with me, because this is the moment at which most people step back. And it is also the moment at which everything changes. If the objective self is everything you perceive, then the subjective self is the perceiver. It is also called a witness, the observer, or in Sanskrit, sakshi. And this is the one, the self you have been forgetting. The subjective self is not a thing. It is pure awareness, consciousness itself, which lies behind the world of things, but is not itself a thing. It is, in the truest sense, metaphysical, beyond the physical. And because it is not a thing, we cannot point to it, measure it, or study it objectively. Here is the irony. If you were to remove this subjective self entirely from the equation, this awareness, this witness, your entire experience of life would collapse instantly. You and everything you have ever experienced would cease. And yet we forget it almost constantly. We overlook it the moment something else captures our attention. The reason we can afford to forget it is that it is going nowhere. Unlike everything else in your life, relationships, roles, beliefs, moods, your awareness itself exists beyond time and space. As Einstein said, time is a persistent illusion. There is only the present moment. The past is always gone. The future is always not yet here. The now is permanent. And the subjective self is that permanence. So why does any of this matter? Because this is not a physical curiosity. This is who you actually are. You are not the bundle of experiences, impressions, thoughts and relationships that make up your human life, however real they feel. You are something far, far larger than that. And when you believe the objective self is the full extent of your existence, you cannot make the most of the life you have. William Shakespeare understood this with a clarity that still holds. All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. When you forget the subjective self, you forget you are the one watching the stage. You step into the drama and believe it to be reality. Open any news site today and you will see that drama playing out in every headline, every argument, every cycle of reaction and counter-reaction. So where does psychology fit into this, and why is it a trap? Psychology, by its own definition, is the scientific study of the mind and human behavior, examining how thoughts, emotions, memories, and perceptions drive actions. It is an honest, well-intentioned discipline, but it creates an immediate and fundamental problem. There is only one tool available to study the mind, and that tool is the mind itself. It's a bit like trying to chew on your own teeth. Useful to a degree, but fundamentally limited. Psychology also tends to deny the subjective self, not maliciously, but by design. Because all science is evidence-based, it cannot engage with anything that lies beyond the reach of evidence. And because the subjective self is not a thing, it cannot be measured, quantified, or tested. It falls entirely outside the frame. In its place, psychology works with constructs, identity, id, ego, belief systems, things which can be observed, categorized, and treated. But these are all objects of experience. They are all ultimately part of the objective self. And because they are things, they change, they shift, they dissolve, which is exactly why psychology is so inconsistent in its results. What works for one person will not work for another. It is called a science, but it's a soft science, and the human mind is simply too complex and too individual for a hard science model to hold. The deepest problem is this. Psychology creates a recursive loop. It uses the mind to analyze the mind, and because it has no access to the subjective self, the only true stable point of reference we have, it eventually disappears into its own complexity. It becomes more sophisticated, more nuanced, more specialized. But it cannot find what it cannot look for. I'm not suggesting psychology has no utility or value. Some of its interventions have genuinely changed lives. But compared to what becomes available when you shift your vantage point to the subjective self, when you see from awareness rather than from within the stream of experience psychology offers, when you see from awareness rather than from within the stream of experience, psychology offers immediate relief rather than a lasting solution. A little like taking an aspirin for a toothache. The pain eases, but the underlying problem remains exactly where it was. If this is landing for you, I have a resource that may help you take the next step. The Inner Leadership Mastery Profile is a scorecard that maps exactly where you currently operate, between the outside in and inside out ways of leading yourself. The link is in the description below. So how do we break out of the trap? How do we reconnect with the subjective self? The answer requires what I would call a metaphysical shift, a turn toward attention, awareness, and what is known as metacognition, the practice of becoming aware of your own mind and its movements, rather than simply being inside them and carried along by them. And here is the thing. The method itself is beguilingly simple. So simple that the human mind, with all its sophistication, tends to dismiss it or complicate it before it has even tried it. The mind resists simplicity because simplicity offers no problem to solve, and the mind loves a problem to solve. The practice is this. You take a step back, you come into the present moment, you observe the movements of your mind, the thoughts, the emotions, the patterns, without being overwhelmed by them. You feel what arises without fusing with it. You notice your beliefs and mindsets without immediately investing in them. You begin to prefer rather than to judge. Perhaps the most direct path to this is meditation, sitting deliberately in a state of non-doing, observing without intervening, nothing added, nothing removed, pure witnessing. And if that sounds too simple to be useful, that is exactly the response the mind produces when it first encounters it. The mind will find something more productive to do, something more stimulating, something that feels more like progress. That is the trap reasserting itself. The psychology trap is not the result of bad science or poor intent. It is the natural consequence of a discipline that cannot look where it needs to look. It studies everything within the objective self with great care and considerable skill, but it cannot reach the subjective self, and that is the one shift that would transform everything else. You are not your thoughts, you are not your feelings, you are not your roles, your identity or your beliefs, particularly about yourself. You are the one who is aware of all of those things, and the moment you begin to live from that awareness, even briefly, even imperfectly, the trap begins to lose its hold. If you found this useful, the Inner Leadership Mastery profile in the description below will help you understand where you stand and what to work on next. And if this raised questions you'd like to explore, leave them in the comments. I read every one. See you in the next video.